Welcome back, and joining us to take us through the day's markets performance is Andrew Padoa from Sasfin Wealth. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. So what are you making of market action playing out at the close? We see the all share, or rather the JSE broadly back in the green after yesterday's bloodbath. More importantly, precious metals also rebounding. It looked like the dollar briefly reclaimed its status as the safe haven asset of choice. Is that still the case, or are we starting to see a bit of a rotation back into precious metals?
In Towling, I think, the bounce we saw today, like you said earlier, we haven't recovered the losses that we saw yesterday. Yesterday was brutal. That was kind of like COVID, the plunges of the COVID
Felt
in March
like
2020.
Liberation Day all over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and global financial crisis. So, but yeah, we didn't recover those losses from yesterday. But nice to see a bit of green on the screens today. But I think this has not been solved. What's going on in Iran, and I think the concern is the longer this goes on for in Towling, the worse the outcome. The more likely oil will remain elevated. The more likely we'll see interest rates maybe going up instead of down, because higher oil prices are obviously inflationary. And we'll see knock-on economic consequences, negative economic consequences, the longer this goes on. So, yeah, it's just a waiting game. Hopefully it doesn't last very long, and then we can all just kind of move on.
Zooming in on what you just said, we are hearing growing concern from economists about the energy-driven inflation risks. Realistically, how long would the conflict in the Middle East need to drag before it materially shifts the inflation outlook?
It's difficult to say, but I would say if this lasts a couple of days, then we can all kind of just move on. But if this starts to last a good couple of weeks, then I think that we're going to see some of these negative consequences we were just discussing. All
right, let's move over to company news. Woolies out with numbers today, delivering a 10% jump in HEPS, turnover up 5%. But margins slightly under pressure due to promotional activity. How concerning is that margin squeeze, even though we are, seeing some stabilization within the South African operations, particularly looking at that fashion unit?
Yeah, so they flagged that the margin pressure was due to a couple of things. One was their investment in the distribution centers. So that's kind of, investing today to make the money tomorrow. And that's okay. That's fine. But, when you start to see promotional activity to get rid of old inventory, then it starts to be a little bit more, concerning. So, they didn't go too much into it, apart from just saying that margins were under pressure. But I feel like Woolies is an interesting one. There's always something going on there. There's Australia, there's issues in Australia, then that's kind of okay. And now it's margins in South Africa. It's kind of like trying to plug a bucket with 10 holes in.
Shame, they can never catch a break. But one thing's for sure, that food business continues to really outperform the whole group on that front. Now, let's take a look at Cashbuild. Numbers looking good as well. What I found interesting, though, is that much of the top line momentum came from new and refurbished stores, with existing stores showing only modest gains. What does this tell you about volume growth as well as underlying consumer demand?
Yeah, I think Cashbuild's a great proxy for how things are going, on the streets in South Africa. And I think these results, they were okay, but we haven't turned the corner. Cashbuild's shares have been under quite a bit of pressure the last couple of years because, the truth is the average South Africans had a tough time. So I think we're near the turn. Let's see what happens though with this Iran thing. But, we are seeing some green shoots in South Africa, which should be positive for the average person on the street. And hopefully Cashbuild can be a beneficiary of that.
Yeah, and I mean, today we also got the business confidence print out from RMB in the morning, and also speaks to improving sentiment. And hopefully that starts filtering through to the broader economy. Then, Andrew, let's look at Quilter quickly, posting record inflows and a £100 million share buyback. Yet the stock is in the red. Why the disconnect? What am I missing here?
In Towling, I'm also scratching my head at that one. Those results look pretty good. I think they flagged that they nearly doubled prior year's record inflows. So, all the things that you want to see with an asset manager, they kind of delivered. Maybe it's got to do with strategy, because there seems to be a lot going behind the scenes. They're trying to reposition the business for the ultra high net worth client, where, you know, you got a lot of tax planning, estate planning. It gets a little bit more complicated. Maybe that's why Marcus didn't like it. I don't know, but the results seemed fine to me.
All right, let's move over to your stock pick then. Where do you see value at the moment?
Yeah, on Tarling. So I'm going for Pepkor, another South African stock. I think the retailers in South Africa are starting to look interesting. I don't know if we're at the bottom yet, but, you know, Pepkor is a very good business, very well run, dominance. They're on a forward multiple of 12 times and expected to grow earnings at 12% a year. So for me, that looks pretty attractive.
All right, let's leave it there. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and taking us through trade this evening. That was Andrew Padoa from Sasfin Wealth.